My parents divorced when I was 8 years old. They had just purchased a house together in the woods in Walker, Louisiana, which is 20 or so miles from Baton Rouge. After seeing his subsequent relationships, I realized this is something my father does when his marriage is rocky. He sells his house and then buys or builds a new one for the sake of distraction. I've actually seen it work for him. Once engaged in a new project and excited about the possibilities, his wife might forget to ask why he was out so late, who he was with, and why he smells like another woman's perfume. But this time, his trick didn't work. My mother had had enough. I don't even think we lived in that house in the woods for a full year before my mother suggested he go stay with his whore instead. I wasn't terribly upset by this. My father and I had never been close. He was a no-nonsense high school coach, and I was bookish and skinny and weird. Far from the athlete he'd wanted. Though, to be fair, he didn't try to push me into sports or pressure me in to follow football. Instead, he ignored me entirely in favor of my little brother, Trent, who seemed like he was born with a ball in his hand. Trent didn't play one sport. He played all of them, starting when he was merely a toddler. I never resented either of them for this. I merely mentioned it to help paint a picture of my brother. If Trent and I had been one person, we'd be a very well-rounded individual. Me, precocious and dreamy and even-tempered. Trent, sporty and rough and emotional, living up very well to the reputation that came with his bright red hair even when he was still in diapers. You couldn't have two more opposite children, but we loved each other fiercely, particularly in the early years of our parents' divorce. Though there were 3 bedrooms in this house in the woods, Trent and I shared one, not wanting to be separated. That changed around the time I turned 10. I was starting to get a light dusting of very fine pubic hair as well as the weird self-exploratory sessions that came with it, so I figured it was time I had my own room. Without so much as asking my mother, I began moving my things to the room across the hall to claim my new space. We'd been living in that house in the woods for a couple of years now, and even though it had felt large and empty in the days following my father's exile, now it felt like home, and I had claimed a new room all for myself where I wouldn't be bothered by Trent's nightlight or those soft, irritating snuffling noises he made in his sleep. But still, though I figured I was too old for a nightlight, the inky darkness of my room when I turned my bedside lamp off was a bit too much. My mother would sleep in her room at the end of the hall with the door open so she could hear us if we called, and she would often fall asleep watching Letterman or Seinfeld. The ghostly blue glow of the TV in her room illuminated mine just enough to pacify me, so I began sleeping with my bedroom door open. I was 10 then. I'm 30 now. I have not been able to sleep with my bedroom door open for 20 years because of what I saw standing in my room that night. I don't know what woke me. I was simply awake, and I hadn't been a moment before. Everything was quiet. Everything was still. The sleep timer on my mother's TV must have clicked it off because there was no noise anywhere, not even the whir of the air conditioner. Not even crickets in the woods outside. Simple, unbroken silence. I lay in bed for a while, staring at my ceiling and puzzling over why I had awoken. I realized I was very cold, even though the AC wasn't running. With a small shiver, I pulled my comforter around my shoulders and rolled on my side to face my bedroom door. And there it was. As I am typing this, a strong chill is passing through me. Even 20 years later, the thought of the thing is enough to make every hair on my body stand up straight. I've got to pee quite badly too, but don't feel like I can move until I finish writing this, and I'm done with it, until I push that thing out of my head. A small part of me is afraid that by writing about it tonight, I have somehow summoned it, and that it will be waiting for me in the hallway when I go to empty my bladder. All terrible and white and staring. I don't know what I saw. It was tall, to a 10-year-old anyway, and ghastly thin. It seemed to shine in the thick darkness of my room. It was so pale. Its skin seemed whiter and thinner than paper, its skull a round, hairless dome. It was naked, I think, and though I could see no genitals, I could make out the sharp ridges and curves of its hips. Its fingers, which hung limply at the end of flat, large hands like giant white spiders, seemed unusually long and alien to me. Whether or not it had a mouth or even a nose, I could not say. The darkness was too deep and the thing too white to make such distinctions. The worst part was its eyes. I could see those. Or maybe it had no eyes. Maybe those round black holes in its face were empty sockets, or maybe its brow was so heavy it hid them entirely in shadow. Whether they were there or not, I knew those eyes were looking at me. I froze. A scream rose up in me, but I stifled it into a nearly inaudible sob. I did not move. Could not move. The thing saw me. I knew, but perhaps it didn't realize that I saw it. Maybe if I just kept pretending to be asleep, it would leave me alone. I dared not close my eyes, though. I couldn't let the thing out of my sight for a moment, lest it attempt to creep closer. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity, but in reality was probably no more than a minute or two. Neither of us moving, neither of us making a sound. Both of us just staring. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. It did not acknowledge me, did not attack me, did not make a sound except for the odd popping of its joints and the creaking of the floorboards under its feet as it strode down the hall to the kitchen. It was gone. But still I could not move. The thing was still out there somewhere, and it was even more terrible out of sight than it was standing in front of me. At least when I could see it, I knew where it was and what it was up to now. My mind swam with horrific possibilities of what this thing might be capable of what kind of terrible appetites it must possess. I lay there in the dark for over an hour, fretting over this strange creature and listening to the dark, sleeping house for any sign that it was still around. But nothing came. Steeling my nerves, I took a deep breath and prepared to do the bravest thing I'd done in all my 10 years. I prepared to run to my mother. I slowly slipped out of bed, expecting the moment my feet hit the floor for the thing to snatch them, but it didn't. I stepped carefully and quietly to my bedroom door, expecting that the moment I peeked my head out, it would be there. But it wasn't. I looked left, I looked right, I looked left again, and then, in a burst of speed I didn't know I was capable of, bolted down to my mother's room. My sudden and explosive entry was enough to make her stir. "Drew?" she said blearily while clicking on her bedside lamp. "Is that you? What's wrong?" "Mom, there's something in the house. I saw something looking at me. It was standing in my bedroom door and it was looking at me, and I think it kind of looked like the kid from Powder. Like a bald albino or something." I was so relieved to be with her and telling her what I had seen that I didn't notice the look of shock wash over her face until she grabbed me and pulled me close to her. She was wide awake now, and she looked terrified. "What did you say? Someone was standing in your doorway looking at you?" I nodded. She turned and looked over her shoulder, and that's when I realized for the first time that she wasn't alone. My brother, Trent, was asleep in bed beside her. My mom leaped out of bed and rushed to her closet where she kept her handgun. My mother hated that thing, but she insisted on having one. A single mother with only a 10 and a 6-year-old needed to protect herself. Mom, what's wrong?" I was starting to get scared again. She snatched the cordless phone off its cradle and called my grandfather, who lived about 2 miles away. "Daddy," she whispered into the receiver, "I need you to stay on the phone with me. If something happens, call the police. About an hour ago, Trent came in and got in bed with me, said he couldn't sleep because somebody was standing in his bedroom door watching him. And now Drew just came and told me the same thing. I think somebody is in the house." I had never heard my mother so frightened. "Maybe it's Tommy. Maybe it's somebody else. If it's Tommy, I'm getting a restraining order. Apparently divorce wasn't enough." "Mom, it's not Dad," I said. "It can't be. It was too thin. Dad's got a big belly." "Shh, sweetie, shh. Okay. Daddy, I'm walking through the house right now. Yes, I have my gun. Drew, follow me. If anything happens, run back here and lock the door, and do not open it until Granddaddy or the police get here, okay?" I nodded solemnly. My mother began to move down the hall, turning on light after light as she did so, checking every room, every closet. Within a couple of minutes, the whole house had been searched. Only one room left, the kitchen. My mother entered the room and flipped on the light, seeming to fully expect my father or some deranged killer to be standing there. But no, the kitchen was empty too. We were alone. We were safe. With a sigh of relief, my mother said goodbye to my grandfather and put the phone down on the kitchen counter. "Nobody here," she said. "You must have had a dream, that's all." "No, Ma, I know what I'm dreaming. This wasn't a dream, and Trent saw it too." "Did you both watch that Powder movie recently or something?" "Ma!" She jumped, startled. "What? What is it?" I pointed. The kitchen door, which led out into the backyard and the thick old woods beyond it, stood slightly ajar. I still don't know what I saw that night. I had thought about it and discussed it with my brother and my mother. In recent years, I even questioned my father about it. He wasn't doing too well for a couple of years following the divorce, was doing some weird and creepy things. But no, he hadn't been there that night. And honestly, I never thought he had. Still, I had to ask, because the alternatives are too frightening to consider. I don't suppose I'll ever know what that thing was, and maybe that's for the best. What I do know is I haven't slept with my bedroom door open since that night. If for some reason I forget to shut it all the way before I climb in bed, I will not be able to sleep until I go and close it tight. Because now, in every dark doorway, I see that ghastly white face. I see those terrible dark eyes staring at me.